Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and I have a very special guest on this video who's going to retouch one of my Matisyahu photos. Now, I am not a retoucher. 99% of the photos that I do things to, I do them in Lightroom. I don't do them in Photoshop. Well, this guy is primarily in Photoshop and almost never goes into Lightroom because he is a great retoucher. There are so many different things that you can do in Photoshop to touch up the raw image, and you're going to see what he did with one of my Matisyahu shots. Now, there's, like I said, so many different things you can do. Now, it doesn't mean that one thing's right, one thing's wrong. This is a different look at another option you have for editing your images. So what I did is I sent him a Matisyahu raw file from here in the loft that we took with kind of Peter Hurley style lighting, and I went ahead and did that. And it looked great. So I sent him the file. He went ahead and made you guys a tutorial showing you a walkthrough exactly how he made all of the changes step by step to this file until he got to the final results. So Nathaniel Dodson, he's a great guy. He's in Philly. He's younger, but he has so much work that he's done on YouTube. He's Tutvid on YouTube. You can subscribe to his channel if you want to check out some of the work that he's done with his post-processing and what do we call it again, Steven? Retouching. I keep forgetting the word retouching. So watch his retouching of my photo and definitely check him out. And I'm going to sign off so now that you can see it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.
Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com and FroKnowsPhoto.com. My name is Nathaniel. I run the website tutvid.com, and today we're going to take a look at retouching this gritty style portrait using Photoshop. We're going to use some adjustment layers and some other cool things in Photoshop to retouch this sort of non-destructively and give you a ton of editing options down the road. So let's say you look at this image in a few months, you can come back and make all kinds of changes. So with all of that in mind, let's jump over to the Adobe Bridge, and we have this original shot here. It's an NEF file. If I double click, I will open it in Photoshop's Camera Raw. We're going to see that this file was shot with a Nikon D4, and it's a great file. We've got all of this detail. Let me just zoom back out. And I'm going to immediately just go back to the Camera Raw defaults and check out the image as we saw it out of camera. So this is the shot right out of camera. We haven't changed the light at all. We haven't changed the color, temperature, nothing. What I want to do is bring this photo into Photoshop. I want to dump some of the contrast. The blacks are a little bit too dark for me, and even the shadows sort of on the side of his face. The highlight is definitely right here in the middle of his face. So we want to lighten all of that up and sort of fake this increased dynamic range that the D4 is capturing. So I'm going to do that by bumping up the exposure just a touch. I'm going to knock the contrast way down, maybe like -45, something like that. And then I'm also going to boost the shadows a little bit and boost the blacks as well. Now, one of the other things we can do is bump the clarity up just a touch. You want to be very careful with the clarity slider, however. It can start to make your pictures look really, really bad. We are going to also set the tint to just straight up 0 and then bump the temperature up to about 6,000. All right, so there we go. We've got kind of a cool picture. The other thing I'm going to do is just click on my little output link here, and I'm going to choose to open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. I typically do this with all of my images. It forces me to work a little bit more non-destructively with them and gives me the option to come back into Camera Raw later. Go ahead and hit OK, and then choose the Open Object button, and this file is going to jump right into Photoshop and open up for us. So give it a second here. Give it 2 seconds. There we go. So it's open now, and you can see we have this original shot layer over here in our layers panel. Now, the first thing we're going to do is duplicate this layer. However, because it's a smart object, if I simply duplicate the layer, any change, by the way, you can duplicate the layer, Command or Control J. Any change I make on this layer by, let's say, double-clicking the thumbnail, which is going to take me back to the Camera Raw editor, is going to automatically happen to the other smart object as well. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to undo that. What I want to do is right-click on this layer and choose New Smart Object via Copy. It's going to copy the smart object, but it's going to create a new actual smart object, not simply a new instance of this smart object. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and set this layer to the blend mode of overlay. All right, so we're really blowing out the colors. You can see the contrast is going wacky on us. So we're going to double click on the thumbnail, and we're going to do some processing here in Camera Raw. First thing we're going to do, go to the HSL gray slider tab right here and choose Convert to Grayscale. And we're going to boost the reds a little bit. All right, if we bring the reds way down, you can see pretty much it's the lips and the ears and little spots under the eyes. We want to bring that up, put some light into there. We're going to drop the oranges and the yellows quite a bit. So you can see it's going to almost make his face look like it's very dirty, almost like he just came out of a coal mine or something. Go ahead with that. That's great. I'm going to boost the blacks even more. We really want to bring detail out in the coat because as we add contrast, this area of the coat here is going to become very, very dark. We don't want that. So we're going to boost the shadows and the blacks, and we may even have to drop the highlights. So even here, all of this highlight area on his face, as it looks to us like it's not very highlight-y, but there is still a bit of light in there. We're going to go ahead and hit OK and see what this looks like. It's going to prepare the smart object and just check out the difference here so far. So there's before we added our contrast layer. Here's after we added our contrast layer. It's still far too bright, so we're going to go back into the camera raw editor and adjust it once more. We're going to drop the overall exposure to about negative 0.15. And I am going to drop the whites. So I'm going to knock the whites down, maybe even the highlights a little bit too. You're kind of just free form. It all depends on the image you have. Then we're going to hit OK. We're going to check it out. It should hopefully dull these highlights on his face, and overall, that looks great. All right, so now that we've done that, we are going to clean up some blemishes on his face. So I'm going to do this by creating a new layer. Hit the new layer icon there, and I'm going to name this layer Blemishes, like so, and I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to grab my zoom tool and I'm going to zoom in. I'm most interested in just cleaning up just a few larger blemishes. There's this sort of hair or whatever that is on the lapel or collar of the jacket, a little spot over here, a couple spots on his skin we're going to clean up, but we really want to leave the nice weathered look to his face. He's not, a high fashion model where we're going for this extreme retouched image. So I'm going to use the healing brush, not the spot healing brush, but the healing brush, and I'm going to set the sample setting to current and below. I'm going to right click, just downsize my brush just a touch. I'm going to use my Alt or Option key to sample, and I'm just going to paint over some of the larger blemishes that I see. All right, there's even this hair coming down off his head. We can get rid of that just in a couple clicks, like so. Great. There's a spot here on the neck. Boom, get rid of that. Let's get rid of this hair over here. All right, it's just kind of like quick, easy stuff. Just Alt or Option click to sample a point in your image from which you will be sampling. And the more important thing is brightness is important, but really the texture. You want to try to sample from areas that have similar texture. That's quite important. So we're going to go ahead and just blast through this real quickly. All right, no need to be extraordinarily perfect here. Typically, yes, you're going to want to be very perfect, but in this case, we're just trying to knock it out. All right, so now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and add some highlights and shadows in the actual eye. This is going to add some depth within the actual eye for us, which is going to make the eyes a little bit more engaging and definitely pull you right and make those the focal point of the image. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call it Eye Pop Light, and I'm going to create a new layer above that and call it Eye Pop Dark. I'm going to go to Eye Pop Light first. What I'm going to do is just look at the iris, the colored part of the eye. I'm going to grab my brush tool. It's the hotkey is B, and I'm going to use a very small brush, maybe 1, 2, or 3 pixels, something like so. Yep. I'm going to set my foreground color to white. All right, so I just did that. You do that, by the way, by hitting the letter D first, which resets your colors, and then X sets foreground as sets white as the foreground color. Excuse me. So what I'm interested in doing here is just painting over any highlight lines that I see in the actual colors of his eye. All right, just like this. Just you don't hit every single one of them or be necessarily exacting and perfect, but you want to be sort of close. So we'll just go through and just do this really, really quickly. All right, so now that we've done that, we're going to go up to the Eye Pop Dark layer. We're actually going to shut off the Eye Pop Light layer so it doesn't distract us. And here on the Eye Pop Dark layer, we're going to do the same exact thing just with the color black. So I'm going to hit the letter X, which sets black as my foreground color, just really flips the colors. And I'm going to be painting just as I was doing before. Just this time, I'm targeting the nice little shadowy areas of the iris, the colored portion of the eye here. Alrighty, wonderful. So now that we've done that, I can turn the Eye Pop Light layer back on, and you can see we just have this mixture of these very white and very black lines. I'm actually going to zoom back in on the eye. I'm going to set both of these layers to the blend mode of overlay, and it's going to look pretty extreme right off the bat, because what we want to do, I'm going to go back to the Eye Pop Light layers. We're going to go Filter Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just choose a very, very subtle Gaussian blur, maybe 1.5 or 2 pixels. This is all going to depend on the resolution of your image. Essentially, I'm just looking to blend the edges of all of my little painted lines so you can no longer distinguish them as lines. They're going to look almost like little electric shocks shooting through his eyeball. So I'm going to hit OK. 1.5 pixels is great. I'm going to choose Eye Pop Dark and just hit Command or Control F to apply the same blur to the blacks layer. All right, at this point, what I'm going to do is reduce the opacity of either one of these layers if it needs to be reduced. I'm just going to take the Eye Pop Dark layer down to about 50 or 60% like so. I'm going to back all the way out. and there we go. We've added this sort of pop to the irises. All right, very subtle, but definitely noticeable all at the same time. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and attack the large blemishes. Typically, I would do blemishes and large blemishes together, but in this case, I guess I got a little distracted by the eyes. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name it large blemishes, like so. And again, we're going to go to our healing brush tool right there. Hotkey for that is J, by the way. And I'm going to make the brush size a little bit bigger. I'm going to use my Alt or Option key, and I'm going to sample below this first sort of wrinkle on his forehead. I'm going to paint across that. Then we're going to do the same thing for the wrinkle on the top. Paint across that. Great. Again, don't worry about it not looking perfect. We're going to fix that in a second. And then these sort of bags under his eyes, and I know you may be thinking they're really not that big as far as bags are concerned, but really anywhere on his face where there is a dimple or a depression, where there's a shadow, that is going to become fairly dark because of the some of the toning that we're going to do in a little bit. So we really want to try to smooth out some of these tones on his face as much as we can here. And you can see it looks ridiculous, right? Don't worry, we're going to kind of blend it all together in a moment. I'm just looking to kind of even things out, and maybe even these little dimple areas here at the edges of his mouth. Those can be kind of cleaned up just a touch. All right, paint along that, and paint right along there. All right, looks a little ridiculous. In fact, there we go. Cool. All right, so what we're going to do to sort of blend this together is simply reduce the opacity of the large blemishes layer, I should say. I'm going to knock it down to about 40%. So you can see we're just sort of lifting those depressed or, you know, larger blemished areas of his face while still retaining a very realistic look, if you will. So that's all we're doing there. Great. Now that we've done that, we're going to begin the toning process with a curves adjustment layer, which you can get to by going Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves. And we can give it a name. We're not going to. What we're going to do is we're going to begin by lifting our shadows and then adding contrast later. So down here, this is the black point. So I'm going to select this point and I'm going to drag it up to about here. You can see we're just lifting all the shadows and really kind of killing off some contrast while we're at it. And then I'm going to drag a point down, maybe like so, and then drag another point right around there. So basically what we've done, what this curve is doing is this point here is lifting the shadows, right? We're pouring light into the shadows. Then we're pulling our line, our curve, if you will, back downward, which is going to darken, and that's darkening up these tones in the image, right? You can see the histogram overlay. So that's like all this stuff out here, we're really darkening back up after lifting the blackest shadows. And then by pulling the line back up here, the curve line back up right up here, we're just adding a little bit more light back to those highlights, those natural highlights that we have. So before the adjustment layer, after the adjustment layer, we've almost given it this very film look, which is kind of cool. We're not done yet, though. We're going to go to the red color channel. And here what we're going to do is we're going to add cyan. The opposite of red is cyan. So we're going to pull down right up here, and that's going to take away some of the red and give us cyan. And I'm actually going to just pull this line back into place down here. Every time you click this line, you're going to add a new anchor point to it. So there's before, there's after. We're still not done. We're going to go to the green channel now, and we're going to sort of add some green to the shadows very subtly. Just pull it up a tiny bit. And then we're going to pull down on the line just a smidgen up here around the top area as well. So we've added just a slight green color cast overall. We're going to go to the blue channel now, and we're going to sort of add a reverse S-curve. So we're going to pull up on the bottom. We're just going to add just a drip of blue to the shadows. And we're going to pull down just a tiny bit, which is going to add just a drip of yellow to the highlights. So there's before, there's after. One curves adjustment layer, and we've begun the toning process. Now, at any point in this process, if you get an image that you love, run with it. Keep it. It's great. That's the name of the game here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer. What we want to do is really kill off contrast in the image and lighten the entire thing up. So I'm going to grab the black output level slider and drag it up to maybe like 70, an output of about 70, right? You can, that's crazy, right? That's all right. And then we're just going to move our midtone slider over toward the white handle just a tick. Then I'm going to go into the red channel, and what I want to do with the red channel is I'm going to pull the white handle over, maybe to right around 245. Again, the opposite of red is cyan. So when we pull on this blue, or the white slider, it's going to add this bluish cyan color. All right, so we're going to drag it to about 245. Then we're going to go down to the blue channel, and this time we're going to drag the black slider, because that's going to add blue to our image. We only want to drag it a little bit, though, maybe to like 30 or so. 30 looks good. All right. I'm going to drag, well, I'm going to leave, I'm going to drag the properties over here. What am I thinking? All right, so next up, we're going to use a hotkey, Command or Control, Shift, Alt-Option-E. So that'd be Control-Shift-Alt-E on the PC, Command-Shift-Option-E on the Mac. What that does is it grabs all of your layers that you've created and merges them to a new layer. And we're going to name this layer Multi, as in multiply, because we're going to use the multiply blend mode. So we've just taken this merged layer and multiplied it. So there's before we multiplied, there's after. So what we've got now are these very rich tones and almost this sharpness that we didn't really have out of camera, yet we still haven't even sharpened the image. It just seems to give the colors and contrast a little bit of a really nice snap to them. So we've gone ahead and done that. Next up, there's a little bit too much color, a little bit too much yellow in the skin tones, and maybe even a little bit too much blue overall. So instead of going back and tweaking the adjustment layers, just moving forward, I'm going to add a vibrance adjustment layer here and knock the vibrance down, maybe -20, -25, and -20 looks good, right? Before, after. But I don't want this affecting my entire image. I only want it to take the color out of the multiply adjustment layer. So I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and hover between those two layers, and you can see this little clipping mask icon that appears. Hit that, and you clip your vibrance adjustment to just that multiply layer. Therefore, the vibrance is affecting the multiply, which is then blending with everything below it because of the multiply blend mode that we've applied to it. So it's kind of like a subtle way to apply this vibrance adjustment. Pretty cool stuff. All right. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do some other tonal adjustments. The first thing we're going to do is a little bit of a highlight pop, add some contrast to the highlights and make them really jump out with a selective color adjustment layer. The three colors I'm interested in, or rather three ranges or tones that I'm interested in, are the whites, neutrals, and blacks. We're not going to mess around with any of the colors, so we're going to start with whites. And what I'm going to do is take cyan away, which is going to introduce red into my highlights. All right, so we're going to go like -35, all right? There's before, there's after, extraordinarily subtle change. Then we're going to add a little bit of magenta, so I'm just going to push that up, maybe +5, +6, something like that. We're going to take yellow and add some yellow to the highlights, maybe +10. That looks pretty good. And then the blacks, we're actually going to take blacks out of the highlights. Taking blacks out of the highlights, you can see the highlights on his face, they really get super white. We're actually not going to go that crazy. We're going to go like -25, -30. It's just going to add a nice snap of contrast to those highlights, as well as colorizing the highlights a little bit to help them sort of fade into the rest of the skin tones a little. We're going to go over the neutrals now. We're just going to do a couple slight changes. We're going to take some of the cyan out of those neutrals, which is going to introduce red. We're also going to take a little magenta out of them, which is going to give us just a kiss of green, and take some of the yellow out as well, which is going to give us just a little touch of blue in there as well. So negative, you can see these very, very minute adjustments here in a selective color adjustment layer go a long way. So I'm at -3% on the yellow slider, and it's making a very visible difference color-wise. Well, that was stupid to do. So -3 is what I have here. And then for the blacks, we'll probably just leave that at 0. Then over here in the blacks, we're going to do a couple more things. We're going to add a little bit of cyan to the blacker areas of the image. It's almost going to give us this retro-looking blue color cast in our shadows, which I kind of dig. We're not going to mess with the magenta slider. With the yellow slider, we're going to knock a little bit of yellow out, therefore giving us a little bit more blue in those shadows. And then we're also going to take some of the black out of the shadows as well. Again, very subtle. -2 looks pretty good there. So there's what we've done for that. If the whole effect looks pretty spot on, but maybe a little bit too strong, you can always just reduce the opacity of the adjustment layer just a little bit. All right, so next we're going to do a contrast adjustment, and I'm going to use a gradient map adjustment layer for this. By the way, the gradient map adjustment layer, if you're using a simple black to white gradient, is a really, really cool way to get a very editorial looking black and white image. Whatever it is about the tones and the way the gradient map maps everything together, it just works really well and gives a really, really cool black and white image. Not that there are other great ways to, not that there aren't other ways to create great black and whites, but this is a very kind of cool, foolproof way. I'm going to set this layer to a blend mode of soft light, however, but before I do that, well, I'm going to do it here just so you can see the insane amount of contrast that it's adding, which is way too much. So I'm going to go back to normal, and what I'm going to do is just click on my gradient bar here, and I want to make the blacks not so black, because it's making the whole entire image really heavy. So I'm going to go with a very dark gray. You can see it's giving us this very low contrast black and white image, which is kind of cool. I'm also going to choose the white slider, and I'm going to make it maybe a very, very light gray instead of a solid white. Hit OK, and set this to a blend mode of soft light. We've got a much more reasonably contrasty image, but that's still even too much, so I'm going to knock the opacity down to around 40–50%, something like that. There we go. Very cool. Now that we've done that, we're going to do one more tonal adjustment. We're going to use the channel mixer adjustment layer. we're going to tick on Monochrome. And what I'm looking to do is lift the color, or lift the lightness, excuse me, in my shadows and on the skin a little bit as well. So I know the skin typically contains a lot of red, so check that out. When I bring the red slider upward, you can see how it starts blowing out the skin. We don't want to blow out the skin. We want to get it close to being blown out. Greens, will pull that up. You can see that's pretty heavy. And then blues, we might just kind of leave right around 15. Again, this is going to all depend on your image. I'm just looking to make sure he has a lot of light in his skin, because we're going to take this adjustment layer and set this to a blend mode of multiply as well. And I'm going to knock the opacity of this adjustment layer way down, something like 15 or 20%. This is just going to give us a little bit more of this moody light look and feel. All right, now that we've done that, we're going to do just kind of some overall global sharpening. I'm not going to get into any insane sharpening techniques here, but we're going to do something pretty fast and easy. So we're going to go, again, with our merge all layers to a new layer hotkey, Control-Shift-Alt-E or Command-Shift-Option-E. All right, great. Now that we've done that, we're going to convert this to black and white, just desaturate it clean. Control-Shift or Command-Shift-U, and we've got a nice, simple black and white. Now that we've done that, we're going to duplicate this black and white layer by hitting Command or Control-J. Shut off the top layer. We're going to get to that in a moment. We want to do a very big kind of tonal punch sharpening by selecting, well, this black and white layer and going Filter, Other, High Pass. Since we've done that, we're going to drag this radius way up. I'm talking 45 or 50%, something like that, until you get this very halo-y, crazy-looking portrait, or almost a metal plate-looking portrait. Hit OK, and we're going to set this to a blend mode of soft light. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And we definitely, I mean, even on this light background, you can see there's haloing around the ears and the hair, right? There's before, there's after. It is giving us a lot of kind of cool, gritty detail, but just too much of a tonal punch. We're getting the too crazy highlights, or the haloing, excuse me, all around his head. It's just a little too crazy. So we're going to take this and we're just going to knock the opacity way down to about 30, 35%, right? So it's going to be just a nice, you know, boom, tonal punch right down the middle, but nothing crazy. This next black and white layer is just going to be a global, finer sharpening adjustment. So I'm going to zoom into 100% here, and we're going to go Filter, Other, High Pass. And all we're looking for here is to be able to start seeing detail in the pores. That's typically where I stop, is when I start to see some detail in the pores, or sometimes the eyelashes, eyebrows, and hair in general. You start to see a lot of haloing around them. If you see that, you might want to slow down with the high pass as well. So right around 1.8 pixels for this image looks great. And I'm going to set this to a blend mode of soft light. So there's before, there's after. And if you need more sharpening, Command or Control-J to duplicate that high pass layer, reduce that opacity just a little bit, and boom, there you go. So at this point, the image is essentially done. We've created our image. You could at this point go on and continue adding other adjustment layers if you like. In fact, here in the shot that we were initially looking at, it's got a little bit more of a cyan color cast, because after my sharpening, see sharpening big, which is that big crazy tonal punch sharpening, and then the detail sharpening, I added another curves adjustment layer, another vibrance layer levels, and a gradient map as well, just to mess around with the color a little bit. But for now, this is what we've got. So we've got an image, and if I go all the way back down, hold down my Alt or Option key, there's the image that we started with out of camera. There's the image now that we've retouched it and given it this very gritty, heavy look in Photoshop. And there's all kinds of things you can do just by going in and playing around with your adjustment layers here. You know, maybe you think the shadows are too heavy. All right, well, go change up the shadows, right? You know, reduce the opacity of the multiply layer here a little bit. And you're going to kind of bring up the light in the image altogether. Anything. You need more contrast, increase the soft light gradient map layer, and so on and so forth. So that is a little bit of how you can use Photoshop to non-destructively create this really cool, gritty portrait that you've shot, and bring it to Photoshop, retouch it, clean it up, and all that good stuff. So that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around. Obviously, you can check out lots and lots of other great camera and photography-related info on phronosphoto.com, and there's plenty of other tutorials and resources over on my site, tutvid.com as well. So thanks for sticking around and checking this out. Take it easy.